Like a grand and miraculous spaceship, our planet has sailed through the universe of time.
Like a grand and miraculous spaceship.
Grand and miraculous.
Grand and miraculous.
I think with the Muppets, there's sort of an innocence to them, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that appeals to the child in everybody. Because I think everybody is a child in everybody still.
Well, we all want to build a time machine, don't we? So when you enter Disneyland, you're entering a time machine.
I only hope that we never lose sight of one thing, that it was all started by a mouse.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Grand and Miraculous. I'm your host, John, aka Spaceship Ears, and this is episode 29, if you can believe it. And we're covering the Submarine Voyage tonight. Before we do, I want to start with a memory, and this memory isn't mine. It belongs to a woman named Shannon Bauman. In the mid-1960s, Shannon worked at Disneyland as a mermaid, a real mermaid, or as real as Disneyland could make one. She would spend her shifts swimming in the submarine lagoon, waving to guests through portholes, performing underwater stunts. She called it a dream job. At the end of each day, Shannon was the last one out of the water, and she had one final task, diving to the bottom of the lagoon to collect the combs and necklaces and all the jewels that have accumulated there throughout the day. You see, guests on the skyway overhead would throw coins down to the mermaids, coins that glittered as they sank, an unexpected tip jar at the bottom of a theme park lagoon. I love that image, the daily accumulation of small offerings from guests who believed, even just for a moment, that those mermaids were real. That's what we're exploring today. Not just attractions, but belief. A belief that we could go underwater, the belief that we could explore the depths without joining the Navy, without risking our lives, the belief that wonder could be manufactured, bottled, and experienced for the price of an e-ticket. In 1870, Jules Verne published 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. His creation, Captain Nemo, became one of literature's most enduring characters, the genius exile who found freedom beneath the waves. 84 years later, Walt Disney brought Verne's vision to the big screen. The 1954 film 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea starred James Mason as Captain Nemo and Kirk Douglas as the harpooner Ned Land. Now, it won Academy Awards for Best Art Direction and Best Special Effects, and it featured something that would echo through Disney theme parks for decades, Harper Goff's iconic design for the Nautilus submarine. That submarine, that impossible, beautiful, Victorian contraption would find its way into Disneyland on opening day. It would inspire a fleet of 8 submarines that Vice President Nixon himself would help dedicate. It would cross the Atlantic to Paris and the Pacific to Tokyo, and it would nearly disappear forever before being resurrected with the help of a little clownfish named Nemo. This is a story of Disney's submarine attractions. The 20,000 Leagues exhibit, the Submarine Voyage, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea at Magic Kingdom, Les Mystères du Nautilus in Paris, the Tokyo Disney Sea version, and the Finding Nemo Submarine Voyage that sails today. It's a story of engineering marvels and live mermaids, of cast member pranks and tragic closures, of submarines buried in landfills and organs that found new homes in haunted mansions. And it's a story about a dream that wouldn't die. Let's dive in. For those of you who are new to this show, thank you so much for being here tonight. The purpose of this series is to unveil the magic behind theme park attractions, to explore their creators, their immersive worlds, and the moments that keep us coming back with your voice shaping the journey. As I do at the beginning of every episode, I like to throw some trivia out there. So let's see how many of you know this. When Disneyland opened, how many submarines, well, not when Disneyland opened, when the Submarine Voyage opened, how many submarines were in Disneyland's Submarine Voyage fleet? I'll explain the answer at the very end. If you know it, throw it in chat. And of course, I would like to encourage you, if you have memories of either attraction or even the ones across the seas, throw them in chat as well. You know, this community is what makes this community so much fun. So throw your opinions and your experiences, and we can all recollect our favorite memories of this great attraction. As always, I like to encourage you to go to our website. You can go to www.grandandmiraculous.show. Tonight's entry code is Nemo, and hopefully Nightbot is doing things right. If it isn't, tonight's code is Nemo, N-E-M-O. I think it's doing it right. So before while that's scrolling, let me pop over to chat. I see a lot of great friends in chat tonight. I see Debbie Bernfeld. Hey, Debbie, hope you're doing great. Mattercam Matt, great to see you, Matt. Thanks for your support. Mr. Lamont Gray's in the house. Hey, Lamont. Miss K Bell's in the house. Hello, Miss K. Let's see. Scroll. Jason Thibodeau. Hey, Jason. Hope you're doing fantastic. Elisa Neal. Hey, Neil. Thanks for being here and for all your support. It means the world. Let's see. I saw Jason. Scroll. Paul Engel is in the house. Hey, Paul. Hope you're doing great. Beaker and Honeydew is always in chat wishing us well. Thank you, Beaker and Honeydew. It's great to see you guys. And scroll. Theme Park Casual. Hey, Danny. Hope you're doing fantastic. I know that you and I were excited about this one. Scroll. I see Jeannie. Hey, Jeannie. Hope you're doing great. And Miss Oodalali Lane, my super duper helper. Thanks, Kate, for all that you do. And Pete McDevitt. Guys, if you haven't watched it, please, I'm going to go paste this. Please do yourself a favor and go watch the fantastic dialogues episode that Pete had tonight. I'm just going to drop this in chat because you all have got to see this thing. The episode was with Joe Lanzaro, and the content was just bloody fantastic. He talked about a key period in Imagineering history, dropping names that you hear on this series every week, like Claude Coates, Mark Davis, so many renowned names. And Pete and Jen just hit it out of the park. It was one of the best interviews I've seen. So please go and support them. Go watch the show. You guys did fantastic. So, all right. I think that is it. Let me turn off the scroller and then we can start getting into it. So, where do we begin? Well, we begin like we always do. July 17th, 1955, opening day at Disneyland. So, by the way, another plug, go watch Disneyland Handcrafted by Leslie Iwerks. Oh my gosh, it's free on YouTube. Go watch it. It's just, I'm speechless how good it is. But it really puts you in the frame of mind of Walt. And Walt Disney had a problem when Disneyland opened. And that problem was Tomorrowland. Tomorrowland was not ready. The Land of the Future was ironically behind schedule. He needed attractions, anything to fill the space while his team scrambled to complete more ambitious plans. Well, an employee whose name has been lost to history, made a suggestion. What about the sets from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea? The film had been a massive hit just a year earlier. The elaborate sets were sitting in storage. Well, why not bring them to the park? Walt agreed. It was supposed to be a temporary solution, a 6-month exhibit, while longer-term plans came together. Well, guess what, friends? It lasted 11 years. The 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea exhibit was an A-ticket attraction, the lowest admission tier you could have, accessible to everyone. Guests entered underneath a 40-foot wide mural depicting the Nautilus in battle with a giant squid. There were 2 large portholes on either side that displayed photo blow-ups from the film. Inside, they walked through the actual movie sets, not recreations, not replicas, the real sets that Kirk Douglas and James Mason had walked through during filming. Now, there was a familiar voice that guided you through the experience. Mr. Thurl Ravenscroft, the same man who voiced Tony the Tiger, who sang, "You're a mean one, Mr. Grinch," who would later become part of the Haunted Mansion singing busts, of course, provided the narration. "Welcome aboard the Submarine Nautilus," he intoned. "You will see the Academy Award-winning motion picture sets actually used in filming Walt Disney's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea." Well, throughout the exhibit, Whale of a Tale played on a continuous loop. The sea shanty, of course, that Ned Land sings in the film. The walkthrough began with a view of the Nautilus at rest on the ocean floor, treasure chests spilling gold coins nearby, and guests entered the ship itself. The wheelhouse came first, where the submarine was steered, shiny brass gauges, viewing ports on each side of the wheel, Victorian ironwork that Harper Goff described as, quote, ornate but not frivolous, avoiding what he called, quote, sewing machine Gothic. The chart room followed, dominated by a spiral staircase. We know we love our spiral staircases, right, Dad? The strongest visual element of the exhibit. There were rolled charts in cubbyholes, navigation instruments on shelves, everything bathed in blue light. And then came the stateroom, Professor's cramped quarters with his journal still resting on the writing desk. Guests entered through a coffin-shaped door. But the heart of the exhibit was a salon. Plush red velvet seating, exotic marine life specimens in jars, gilded cases of treasures from around the world. There was almost a Pompeian fountain, borrowed interestingly enough from MGM's film, Quo Vadis. And at the far end, Captain Nemo's pipe organ. Bach's Toccata in Fugue in D minor played continuously. Nemo gave musical expression to his tormented soul, the narration explained. The organ sat there, massive and imposing, as if the captain had just stepped away and might return at any moment. While beyond the salon, guests reached the attraction's climax. The giant squid, of course. Viewed through what the narration called the starboard viewing port, even though it was actually on the port side. The squid was enormous, 70-foot tentacles, according to the narration. The original hydraulic system had been replaced with cables for easier maintenance, giving the creature like a puppet-like appearance. But in the dim, oscillating light, with the wires effectively masked, it still sent chills through guests. This squid was so large that it didn't fit inside the main exhibit building. A tin shed had been constructed off the back of the show building just to house it. Now, here's something remarkable. On opening night of Disneyland, the giant squid wasn't ready. Walt Disney himself spent the long evening hours before the park opened painting that squid, racing against the clock. He was assisted by studio artist John Hench. We've talked about him tonight as well. The same Imagineer who would later design everything from Space Mountain to Tokyo Disneyland. Two of Disney's most important creative minds, covered in paint, frantically trying to finish a mechanical monster before the gates opened the next morning. That's the kind of hands-on dedication that built Disneyland. And if you've seen Disneyland Handcrafted, you know what I'm talking about. Now, the exhibit was full of creative shortcuts that guests never noticed. The diving helmets worn by the mannequins, they were cheap Japanese sponge diving helmets with fancy pipes and fittings soldered on. The glowing lights in the power supply room that looked like advanced nuclear technology, well, they were the bottoms of glass salad bowls. The original rubber diving suits eventually rotted and had to be replaced with fiberglass castings. The oceanic props were rented from a company called Marine Props and Rentals in Culver City. But when the rental costs got too high, Disney's prop department slowly replaced them with studio-made versions. Now, originally, the exhibit was supposed to have costumed guides leading groups through in an organized fashion. Instead, it became an unchaperoned walkthrough, guests exploring at their own pace. Now, by the mid-1960s, the exhibit was showing its age. The materials were deteriorating. The sets, after all, had been built for a movie, designed to be used once and discarded, not to withstand a whole decade of guest traffic. But more importantly, Tomorrowland was getting a major renovation. Walt needed the space for new attractions. The temporary exhibit that had lasted 11 years finally had to go. In August 1966, the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea exhibit closed for good. The sets were carried out through large double doors behind the squid room. There was one account describing what happens next in haunting terms. Quote, "The dismembered body of the giant squid laying cracked and shriveled in the hot California sun. 11 years of guests' memories reduced to rubble in a California parking lot. But something survived. I'm going to tell you now that Captain Nemo's organ was saved. It wasn't destroyed with the rest of the exhibit. It found a new home in another attraction entirely. But I'm not going to tell you where, not yet. That reveal comes at the end of this episode, because the story of that organ, the way it connects the 1955 exhibit to attractions that exist today, is the perfect ending to this journey. For now, just know something survived the demolition. The dream of undersea adventure, it didn't die in that California parking lot in 1966. It was about to be reborn in a way that Walt Disney himself had been planning for years. Let me pop over to chat. I see some great folks come in. I saw Miss Sierra, Cruise and Theme Park Guide. Thanks for being here. Let's see, scroll. See lots of great chat. Keep it up, folks. If I see some more folks and I don't recognize you, please holler. I will eventually. Hey, speaking of, Karen Desert Girl. Thanks for being here, Karen. Great to see you. Okay, let's move back in time a little bit. August 3rd, 1958. The real USS Nautilus, the world's first nuclear-powered submarine, made history. Commander William R. Anderson and 116 crew members traveled beneath the polar ice cap of the Arctic Ocean. They became the first ship to cross the geographic North Pole. This was one of the great achievements of the Cold War era, a triumph of American engineering and exploration. Less than a year later, Disneyland would give ordinary guests their own voyage to the North Pole. They wouldn't need to join the Navy. They just needed an e-ticket. The Submarine Voyage was part of the 1959 Tomorrowland expansion, what some called Disneyland's second opening. 3 revolutionary attractions debuted that summer. There was a Matterhorn bobsleds, the world's first tubular steel roller coaster. This technology would eventually enable everything from Space Mountain to modern thrill rides. The monorail, the first daily operating monorail system in the Western Hemisphere. And the Submarine Voyage, a fleet of 8 submarines that would take guests on a 9-minute journey through liquid space. Now, the submarines were designed by Joseph W. Fowler, a retired Rear Admiral of the United States Navy. Who better to command Disney's submarine fleet than an actual Navy commander, right? And here he is. The hulls were built by Todd Shipyards in San Pedro, California, a real shipyard that built real vessels for the real Navy. Then they were driven down the freeways and side streets of Southern California to Anaheim. I want you to imagine that for a moment. 52-foot submarines traveling through traffic, past gas stations and grocery stores on their way to a theme park. Each submarine cost $80,000 at the time. The lagoon held 9 million gallons of water. And here's a detail that shows how seriously Disney took this project. They had to get Anaheim city laws changed to allow underwater vessels to operate within city limits. On June 6, 1959, 8 days before the attraction opened to the public, Vice President Richard Nixon attended the dedication ceremony. Walt, of course, was there with his wife Lillian, and officers from the U.S. Navy lent military gravitas to the proceedings. The press loved it. It was a fantastic story. Walt Disney now commanded the 8th largest submarine fleet in the world. Now, these submarines were christened with names drawn from nuclear submarine program, a deliberate connection to the U.S. Nautilus that had crossed the North Pole. There was a Nautilus, there was the Seawolf, there was a Skipjack, Triton, George Washington, Patrick Henry, Ethan Allen. These weren't whimsical Disney names. These weren't something you saw on the side of a Jungle Cruise boat. These were the names of actual nuclear submarines. This was a pride of the American Navy during the space race era. Well, years later, in the 1980s, the Cold War associations faded, and 6 submarines were renamed to an exploration theme: Neptune, Sea Star, Explorer, Voyager, Argonaut, Triton. Only the Nautilus and Seawolf kept their familiar names. Now, what was it like to ride the Submarine Voyage? And if you have memories of riding in this fantastic attraction, please drop it in chat so we can share. Well, you first descended a spiral ladder into the vessel. 38 passengers sat in rows, each with their own personal porthole. There was a stream of cool air that flowed from beneath each porthole. This was a touch to prevent motion sickness in the claustrophobic space. Now, these submarines weren't actually submarines, of course. They rode on rails beneath the water like an underwater train. The guests sat below the waterline, looking through portholes at scenes constructed in the lagoon and in a massive show building. "This is a captain speaking," the narration began. "Welcome aboard. We are underway and proceeding on a course that will take us on a voyage through liquid space." And that phrasing was very intentional because right down the road, there was adventure through inner space. So having the inner space, liquid space conjunction was very intentional. The voyage took guests through a series of spectacular scenes, of course. There was a crystal clear tropical lagoon populated with giant clams, moray eels, and groupers. There were sea turtles that were swimming through kelp forests. There was a battle of crabs on the ocean floor. And then came the surface storm, simulated by a waterfall, and bubble effects at the entrance to the show building. The captain ordered the submarine to dive deeper to avoid the danger. Now, I don't know about any of you, but as a kid, that sold me. Going through that waterfall, seeing all the bubbles, I was diving. Well, until I kind of looked up and saw the surface of the water, but hey, who's counting, right? The transition was just brilliant. After that, the graveyard of lost ships appeared, sunken vessels from various centuries, their treasure scattered on the ocean floor. "No stopping to pick up souvenirs," the captain warned. Now, beneath the polar ice cap, icebergs stabbed through the water above. The submarine had reached the North Pole, the same North Pole that the USS Nautilus had crossed just a year earlier. The deep ocean darkness revealed bioluminescent fish providing eerie light. There were mermaids that were appearing in the depths, mythical beings that guests couldn't quite believe that they were seeing. The lost continent of Atlantis glowed with volcanic activity. There was red-lit bubble eruptions hinting at the ancient civilization's power source. And then, of course, came this, the climax. There was an 80-foot sea serpent, and for a good minute or so, you only saw its body, and bigger and bigger and bigger, kind of almost like a sine wave. It was getting bigger and bigger, and you wouldn't quite know what you would be face to face with. And then he saw this gentleman, cross-eyed and magnificent, rising from the depths. The Chicago Daily Tribune, covering the opening, described it perfectly. Quote, "Startling realism keynotes the entire voyage, from departure in an exotic South Seas lagoon to the trip's climax, an 80-foot-long sea serpent." Now, 2 years after opening, the Submarine Voyage underwent a major rehabilitation. The lagoon and caverns were completely drained, and there was a team of Imagineering legends went to work. You'll know these names if you've watched this show. Art direction by Dick Irvine, Claude Coates, Mark Davis, Bob Sewell, mechanical work by Roger Broggie and Robbie Robbins. It was like a who's who of Disney's creative elite. They added new creatures, king crabs, lobsters, sea turtles, sunfish, more realistic moray eels, giant clams, manta rays. There was a new scene that featured a shark and an octopus locked in underwater combat. And most significantly, they solved a problem that had plagued the original attraction. No longer will hanging wires be seen, announced the internal newsletter, because Roger Broggie and his mechanical wizards have found the answer to animating in other ways. The animated figures now moved without visible means of support, and now the illusion was complete. Now, operating 8 submarines simultaneously required military precision. During peak attendance periods, cast members employed a technique called wolf packing, 3 submarines going through loading and unloading simultaneously. Now, at peak capacity, the attraction could handle between 1,300 and 1,400 guests an hour. This required 22 attraction hosts working in perfect coordination. Steve Weissman, a working leader, was interviewed in 1978, and he described it vividly. Quote, "It's like a giant chess game, the way we have to move things around." And the training was intense. Quote, "Syncing the sub-speed to the spiel and docking are the most difficult skills," unquote, noted the internal documentation. Each submarine behaved differently, too, in forward and reverse. Each had its own idiosyncrasies for handling and braking. Cast members had to learn the personality of every vessel in the fleet. Behind Fantasyland Autopia sat Disney's Naval Shipyard, the maintenance facility where experienced divers kept the underwater animation and effects and checked these submarines for seaworthiness at all times. Now, we come to the most magical and arguably the most problematic element of the submarine voyage. From 1959 to 1967, with some gaps, Disneyland employed live mermaids. Real women, real swimming, stationed on rocks on the lagoon, waving to guests as submarines glided past. Now, these women were paid $1.65 an hour. Auditions were held at the Disneyland Hotel. Requirements? Height between 5'4" and 5'7", long hair, and obviously the ability to swim. One of these ladies was Shannon Bauman, not pictured here, but she worked as a mermaid in the mid-1960s. She was 6'3", far taller than the official requirements, and had previously worked as a, quote, space girl elsewhere in the park. She called being a mermaid a dream job. She would swim within about 15 feet of the submarines, waving to guests through the portholes. She performed underwater stunts and synchronized swimming. She was usually the last one out of the lagoon at the day, collecting the combs and necklaces and jewels that accumulated on the ocean floor throughout the day. Guests on the skyway overhead would actually throw money down to the mermaids. It was an unexpected tip jar, coins glittering as they sank through the water. But the mermaid program had problems. For one thing, the lagoon was heavily chlorinated, and the chemicals, guess what, turned the mermaid's hair green. The diesel fumes from the submarines were very unhealthy to breathe. Young men would jump into the lagoon trying to swim out and meet the mermaids. And there were costume malfunctions, of course. At least one incident where a mermaid's shell bra came off while she was sitting on the rocks. There was one cast member from that era that recalled rowing out in a little boat to rescue a mermaid who was yelling for a towel, having lost part of her costume. He described it as, quote, saving the day. And then there was a diver. A young man on a dare jumped the fence and dove into the lagoon. He swam towards the submarines and came dangerously close to the propellers. He was terrified, and he swam to the nearest mermaid's rock. The mermaid, still in character, still doing her job, swam him to the dock. She introduced him, of course, to security. But for a moment, think about that. A real person making a real bad decision was led to safety by a woman dressed as a mythical creature. The line between fantasy and reality in these early Disneyland days was extraordinarily thin. Well, the Live Mermaid program ended in 1967. They were replaced by animatronic mermaids. Less magical, perhaps, but considerably less complicated to employ. Popping over to chat, I see some great friends coming in. I saw Miss Monorail Molly, and I see Karen Cook. Hey, Karen, hope you're doing fantastic. Thanks for being here. Who else did I see? I think that's it for now. Again, if I haven't mentioned you, please holler in chat. Keep sharing your great memories. There are a lot of people in chat who don't remember the mermaids, but keep in mind this was a very short period of time and only in Disneyland. Well, working the submarine voyage wasn't easy either. The drivers had to stand in a raised sail position above the guests, and they were exposed to the elements. The ventilation was poor. There was air conditioning that pulled stale air up towards the operator. It was claustrophobic, going around in circles hour after hour, enduring whatever odors the passengers brought aboard. But cast members found ways to make it entertaining. Before the main hatch was welded shut, pranksters would hide a penny in the door mechanism. The door wouldn't close completely, and when the submarines passed under the waterfalls, well, guess what? The driver got drenched. There was a game called Hide the Wingnut. Cast members would steal the fastener for a porthole and then watch the driver frantically search for it as the submarine approached the waterfall entrance. Some cast members on the cavern catwalks above the lagoon would make rude gestures to passing drivers. Some of them pressed their bare rears against the driver's porthole. Well, there was one legendary prank that involved a fire extinguisher, of all things, shot through the sail vent, blasting the driver with CO2. Perhaps the best story involves two pranksters who decided to steal one of the plaster mermaids from the caverns. They unfastened one of the clips holding the figure in place, but underestimated its weight. This mermaid, it pulled free and it sank to the bottom of the lagoon. Well, without hesitation, the operator stripped down into his underwear and he dove in. He performed a cross-chest carry rescue of the plaster mermaid, swimming her back to safety. The problem? A submarine full of guests passed by during the rescue. Well, a woman reported to dock attendants that she had seen, quote, a naked man with a mermaid. The dock attendants laughed it off. Yeah, right, lady. One of my favorite stories captures a kind of deadpan humor that Disneyland cast members perfected. There was an older couple that approached a submarine operator, and they asked, well, how long is this ride? The host, without missing a beat, replied, 2 days. The couple nodded thoughtfully. They took the monorail back to the Disneyland Hotel, they packed their bags, and they returned to the submarine voyage with their suitcases, ready for the journey. Well, the submarine voyage had a generally excellent safety record, but there were some incidents, of course. In the mid-1960s, the original track system was a little bit more freewheeling than the later versions. One pilot took a corner into the caverns too fast. The side of the submarine hit the entrance, smashing 2 portholes. 4 feet of water began flooding in. Cast members rushed passengers onto the cavern scaffolds, the maintenance walkways that they were never intended for guest use. Well, this track was completely revamped afterwards. There was a more dramatic incident that happened on December 7th, 1974. Veteran operator Vince Sweeney was training a new driver. The second submarine in line carried 38 Japanese tourists. The second driver expected Sweeney's famously fast boarding technique, but Sweeney was going slower for training purposes. Well, the second submarine drifted forward and collided with Sweeney's sub. The impact popped portholes. Water gushed in. These poor Japanese tourists wearing suits, carrying cameras, they all stood on their seats as the water rose. Some climbed up onto the sail with the driver. Others panicked and dove into the lagoon. The submarine itself sank about 3 feet onto the track. Remarkably, there were no injuries. The supervisor was fired. The sub remained half submerged for 3 days while divers pumped out the water. Cast members with very dark humor called it Disney's revenge for Pearl Harbor. Well, in the mid-1980s, the 8 Cold War gray submarines were repainted a cheerful oceanographer yellow. These nuclear era names gave way to exploration themes, But otherwise, the attraction remained largely unchanged for 39 years. By 1998, however, the Submarine Voyage was showing its age. The technology that had seemed revolutionary in 1959 now felt dated. The scenes that had amazed guests were now familiar, almost to the point of predictability. Well, in 1998, April, Disneyland president Paul Pressler gave an interview to the Orange County Register. Quote, "We know the show today isn't as relevant as it was," he admitted. "We would hate to abandon the notion of an attraction that goes under the water." On July 29th, 1998, well, it was a sad day. Disney announced the end of the Submarine Voyage. A replacement was promised by 2003. On September 7th, 1998, the last passengers boarded. Now, there was a tradition at Disneyland. On the final day of an attraction, cast members would throw the operator into their respective lagoons. Jungle Cruise captains got dunked. Submarine drivers got dunked. It was a rite of passage, a farewell. But on that last day, one submarine pilot couldn't find anyone to throw him in. Poor guy. So he climbed on top of his submarine and rode it through the waterfalls one final time. And then the submarines went silent. They would sit unused for nearly a decade. Popping over to chat, I see lots of great comments in here. Keep it up, folks. I see Mark is in the house. Hey, Mark, hope you're doing great. I see lots of other folks who have already said hi to. And Dave Strygand is here. Hey, Dave, hope you're doing great. I owe you a reply. Okay, let's move on. Well, let's move to the East Coast. When Walt Disney World's Magic Kingdom opened in 1971, it included an enhanced version of the submarine experience. The 20,000 Leagues attraction specifically opened on October 14th, 1971, 2 weeks after the park itself opened. But this wasn't called the Submarine Voyage. This was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Submarine Voyage, a direct adaptation of the 1954 film, not just a generic underwater journey. Well, the Imagineers went bigger. 12 submarines instead of 8. Vehicles designed to look like Harper Goff's iconic Nautilus, not generic submarines. A ride experience themed entirely around Captain Nemo's world. George McGinnis, who we've talked about on this show, adapted Goff's original Nautilus design for theme park use. Bob Gurr, our friend, oversaw the vehicle project, ensuring the 40-ton vessels would actually function. Now, these hulls were built by Morgan Yachts in Clearwater, Florida, with final work transferred to Tampa Ship. They were delivered in August 1971, just weeks before the park opened. Now, the vehicle interiors were a significant upgrade from Disneyland. There was metal paneling, rivets, bolts, the industrial feel of a Victorian submarine, flip-out passenger seats with armrests, believe that, beneath individual round portholes. Each guest had their own window to the underwater world. There was even a defogging button, although it rarely worked. But most importantly, Captain Nemo himself guided the voyage. Voice actor Peter Renaday, who you see here, performed an uncanny impression of James Mason, the actor who had played Nemo in the 1954 film. There was eerie organ music, a version of the film's main theme that played on a continuous loop. You weren't just on a submarine ride, you were on board the Nautilus, exploring with Captain Nemo. Well, the voyage, like in the film, began in the Vulcania Plains, an introduction to Captain Nemo's underwater world. Moray eels, crabs, lobsters, sea bass, clams, turtles, tropical fish populated these crystal waters. A diver party scene paid tribute to the film, animatronic divers in Harper Goff designed equipment, working through kilt beds, wrestling with sea turtles. The surface storm transitioned guests into the show building. The graveyard of lost ships featured silent, gliding sharks, circling sunken vessels. The polar ice cap sequence showed icebergs stabbing down through the water. The abyss revealed strange bioluminescent creatures in the deep. Atlantis appeared, ruins of the lost civilization, complete with a 2-armed sea serpent and Disney-fied mermaids swimming past a treasury of gold and jewels. And then came the climax, the moment everyone remembered. There was a smaller Nautilus, marked 13 on its hull, was trapped in the tentacles of a giant squid. Now, this monster's long, thrashing arms attacked your submarine. Water bubbled, lights flashed. The squid was recreating the most iconic moment from the 1954 film. For many guests, this was the first time they experienced what it felt like to be attacked by a sea monster. It was theatrical, it was slightly scary, but it was unforgettable. On September 5th, 1994, without advance notice, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea closed. Now, Disney called it a temporary maintenance period. The attraction was supposed to reopen by summer 1996, but that never happened. In April 1996, the permanent closure was announced. The reasons were familiar: expensive to maintain, low hourly loading capacity for such a large attraction footprint. It was a guest favorite for sure, but operationally challenging. Well, these submarines sat in their lagoon motionless. Then they were pulled from the attraction and moved backstage. They sat there for years, shuffled from location to location. In 2004, most of the submarines were stripped and buried in a landfill. 12 Nautilus replicas, 40 tons each. Harper Goff's vision brought to life for millions of guests over 2 decades. Now underground in an Orlando landfill. 2 submarines escaped that fate. They were sent to Castaway Cay, Disney's private island in the Bahamas, and placed in the snorkeling lagoon with cargo netting. Guests could swim over them, peering over the portholes at the empty interiors. One was destroyed by a hurricane. One still exists today, underwater, the last survivor of the Magic Kingdom fleet. A special effects submarine shell was displayed in the water tank at Hollywood Studios from 1991 to 2000. It's now in storage, occasionally brought out for Disney events. Well, the submarine lagoon became Ariel's grotto in 1996, with the King Triton statue installed in the drain basin. This gave way to Pooh's Playful spot from 2005 to 2010. Today, of course, the site is home to the Seven Dwarfs Mine Train and Under the Sea Journey of the Little Mermaid. If you know where to look, you can find Easter eggs, a Nautilus silhouette in the rock wall at the Little Mermaid queue. And at Trader Sam's Grog Grotto in the Polynesian Resort, you can order a Nautilus cocktail, served in a stylized submarine drinking vessel. The submarines are gone, but the memory persists. And somewhere, Shannon Bauman, the mermaid who collected coins at the bottom of a Disneyland lagoon, watches her old workplace transform into something with a cartoon fish on the marquee. The dream refused to die. For now, it just went overseas. Now, here's an irony worth noting. The same year that Magic Kingdom closed its submarine attraction, Disneyland Paris opened a new one. July 4th, 1994, Les Mystères du Nautilus debuted in Discoveryland, the Parisian version of Tomorrowland, themed around the retro-futuristic visions of Jules Verne and H.G. Wells. Now, this wasn't just a ride, it was a walkthrough, a return to the concept that had started everything back in 1955 with the 20,000 Leagues exhibit. Tom Sherman served as lead designer, earning himself the title Admiral of the Nautilus. Our friend, Tim Delaney, who you see here, he discovered Discoveryland. He called the project a dream come true. Well, guests entered through a lighthouse structure, descending a winding staircase, and they found themselves inside Captain Nemo's submarine. There were 6 rooms that recreated the Nautilus. The ballast compartment with Captain Nemo's treasure in an open safe. The captain's cabin with his personal belongings. The charts room with maps including Vulcania Island, Nemo's secret lair. The diving chamber with suits ready for undersea exploration. The engine room with steam effects and lighting. And of course, the heart of it all, the salon. Books, artifacts, sea treasures, and then the far side, a pipe organ, of course. Now, when the attraction opened in 1994, the salon featured an elaborate giant squid sequence. Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor would play. Captain Nemo would give a speech about his ocean kingdom. The window would open to reveal the depths, and then a giant tentacle would slam against the glass. Water would burst from the ceiling. The engines would break down. The window would reopen to reveal the full monster, tentacles thrashing. Electric zaps would repel the creature. It was theatrical, It was terrifying, and it was constantly breaking down. Well, the giant squid scene was scaled back over the years due to technical problems. But in 2023, a major refurbishment removed it entirely. The elaborate animatronic squid, the theatrical centerpiece of the entire attraction, was replaced with screens showing dolphins, hammerhead sharks, humpback whales, and sea turtles. Now think about that transition for a moment. For nearly 30 years, guests experienced a terrifying encounter. Tentacles slamming against glass, water bursting from the ceiling, the desperate electrical zaps to repel the monster. This was the climax. This was a moment of genuine theatrical danger. And now it's a peaceful ocean view. Captain Nemo's reflection, which used to appear mysteriously in a mirror above the organ keyboard, was also removed. The ghost of the captain erased. For Disney enthusiasts, this felt like a betrayal. Not just a technical simplification, but a philosophical surrender. The Paris Nautilus had been the last place in any Disney park where you could experience that giant squid attack. The same scene Walt painted by hand in 1955. The last connection to the movie set exhibit that started everything. And now, a screen shows sea turtles. I understand why Disney made the decision. Animatronics break, water effects cause problems. Screens are reliable, but I think something irreplaceable was lost in that refurbishment, something that can never be recreated. Now, originally, the Paris Nautilus was supposed to be much larger. An underwater restaurant was planned in the salon. There were more rooms intended. It was all part of an ambitious project called Discovery Mountain, a complex that would have included the Nautilus, a volcano, and multiple attractions in one massive show building. But their costs became too high. Discovery Mountain was scaled back to just Space Mountain. The Nautilus became a more modest walkthrough. Still, it survives. As of 2025, you can still walk through Captain Nemo's submarine in Paris, one of the only places in the world where this experience remains available. Now let's move to a different place, Tokyo. On September 4th, 2001, Tokyo Disney Sea opened with the most unusual attraction of all. The park's mysterious island is themed entirely around Jules Verne, a volcanic caldera that serves as Captain Nemo's secret base. 2 attractions anchor this land: Journey to the Center of the Earth and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. But Tokyo's version isn't a walkthrough, and it doesn't use real water. It's a dark ride, a simulated submarine experience. Guests board small vehicles that look like submarines, but they travel through themed environments on a track, never actually going underwater. The windows show movement and bubbles, but it's all effects. The sensation of submersion is created all through special effects, not through actual immersion in water. Now, the narrative is unique to Tokyo. You board a small submarine developed by Captain Nemo. It's supposed to be a safe, remotely controlled expedition. But of course, during a levitation attempt, a kraken attacks. Your submarine loses control. You're detoured into an unknown world and discover Atlantis, evolved into a civilization of mermen near the Earth's center. The mermen's mysterious power eventually boosts your submarine back to safety. Now, it's a 5-minute experience sponsored by Coca-Cola Japan. It solves the operational problems that plague the American submarines. There's no real water to maintain, no complex loading procedures, no submarines that can sink. But arguably, it's a little bit less magical. The American versions actually put you underwater. Granted, just a few feet, but you were underwater. Tokyo simulates this experience. Now, from 1998 to 2007, going back to Disneyland, these submarines sat in their lagoon unused. That's a long time. Rumors swirled. Atlantis Expedition was supposedly in development. This was a reimagining based on Disney's 2001 animated film, Atlantis: A Lost Empire. But when that film failed at the box office, this project was shelved. The submarines deteriorated. The lagoon grew stagnant. Fans wondered if the attraction would ever return. Enter a hero, one of our favorite heroes, Mr. Tony Baxter, the Imagineering legend behind Big Thunder Mountain, Splash Mountain, and Indiana Jones Adventure, became the champion of the submarines. Baxter believed the fundamental concept was still viable. Guests loved the sensation of going underwater. The submarines were unique. Nothing else at Disneyland offered the same type of experience. Now, the problem wasn't the attraction, it was a dated theming. He proposed a radical solution, reimagined the Submarine Voyage around Pixar's Finding Nemo. Now, Finding Nemo had been released in 2003 to massive critical and commercial success. The story of Marlin searching for his son Nemo across the ocean was beloved by the same families who visited Disneyland. The underwater setting was perfect for the submarine lagoon. Well, on June 11th, 2007, Finding Nemo Submarine Voyage opened at Disneyland. The original 8 submarines were refurbished. Digital protection technology was integrated into the scenes. There were new animatronic figures of Nemo, Marlin, Dory, and all the rest of this cast populating this underwater world. The narrative followed the film. Guests searched for Nemo alongside Marlin, encountering sharks, jellyfish, sea turtles, and eventually the tank gang from the dentist's office. Well, the Finding Nemo version proved that submarine attractions were still viable at the modern era. It preserved a fleet that had been dormant for nearly a decade. It combined a classic attraction concept with a popular contemporary IP. Most importantly, though, the submarines sailed again. After the tragic fate of the Magic Kingdom fleet, buried in a landfill, destroyed by hurricanes, the Disneyland submarines represent the last continuously operating submarine attraction in an American Disney park. Now, of course, they're not quite the same submarines that Nixon dedicated in 1959. The technology is different, the theming is different, but there's a fundamental experience. Descending below the waterline, looking through personal portholes at an underwater world. It remains unchanged. This dream didn't die. Now, as we usually do, we have to analyze these attractions using our different pillars. The first pillar, if you followed this show, is immersion. How do we consider immersion? Well, for immersion, I'm giving the submarine attractions a pretty strong score. The fundamental conceit is brilliant. You're actually below the waterline. You're looking through actual portholes at actual water. The bubble machines, the waterfalls, the careful lighting, everything works together to convince you that you're submerged. The Disneyland and Magic Kingdom versions actually used real water, which added authenticity that no simulation could touch. As good as Tokyo is, you can't beat the real thing. When your submarine dove underneath the waterfall, you could hear the water rushing overhead. When you passed animatronic sea creatures, they were genuinely underwater. Now, the Paris walkthrough achieves immersion through detail. Every room of the Nautilus is meticulously designed to make you feel like you've stepped inside the film. Tokyo takes a different approach, simulating submersion through effects rather than water. It's very effective, but it's a little bit less visceral. Now, there's a weak point across all versions, and that, of course, is you're never really in danger. The submarines ride on rails. The polar ice cap is obviously painted concrete. The forced perspective definitely works, but observant guests can see where the illusion ends and reality begins. Like a kid, I looked up, oh, there's a water line. So you got to ding it a little bit for that, but not much. So I'll give immersion an 8 out of 10 for Submarine Voyage. Now, for storytelling, the submarine attractions benefit enormously from their source material. Jules Verne gave us Captain Nemo, one of literature's most complex characters. The 1954 film gave us Harper Goff's Nautilus and James Mason's haunting performance. The attractions, of course, inherit this rich narrative foundation. Now, the Magic Kingdom version told the clearest story, with Captain Nemo's voice guiding you through a genuine undersea adventure. The squid attack provided a climax. The return to surface provided resolution. Well, the Disneyland version was a little bit more abstract, a voyage of exploration rather than a narrative with beginning, middle, and end. It definitely worked, but it was a little bit less focused. Finding Nemo Submarine Voyage benefits from the film's emotional core. The search for Nemo gives guests a reason to pay attention and characters, of course, to care about. Paris tells a story. It's a walkthrough of a space, not a narrative experience. Beautiful, but it's not quite storytelling in the traditional sense. And Tokyo tries to tell an original story about discovering Atlantis, but it's pretty quick. It's compressed into 5 minutes, and it feels a little bit rushed. So storytelling, I give a 7 out of 10, with varying degrees depending on which version you're talking about. Finally, delight. Well, for delight, the submarine attractions deliver something genuinely unique. There's nothing like it. You know, the sensation of boarding a submarine, descending below the waterline, seeing fish swim past you, it creates genuine wonder. Children, like I was back then, really believed you're underwater. Adults remember the first time they took that voyage. The live mermaids represented peak delight, real people swimming in the lagoon, creating moments of magic no animatronic could replicate. The pranks and cast member culture created delight for employees. The 2-day ride story makes me laugh every time. And the tragic closures, unfortunately, diminished delight somewhat. Knowing that the Magic Kingdom submarines were buried in a landfill, knowing that guests can no longer experience the Nautilus in Florida, it does add a melancholy note. But Finding Nemo brought the delight back, seeing children's faces light up when Crush appears, when Dory speaks whale, when the submarine surfaces at the end. That's pure Disney magic, and we got to take our hat to Tony and his team for that. So I give delight a 8 out of 10. Overall, taking the geometric mean, I give this a 7.65 out of 10. Now that places it among the stronger attractions we've reviewed on this show. They represent genuine innovation, technological achievements that no other theme park attempted. They created memories that lasted generations, and one of them still operates today. Of course, please go to the website. I'd like to encourage you to go to www.grandandmiraculous.show, use the entry code NEMO, N-E-M-O, and I'd love to see what your opinion is of this wonderful attraction. Now, I've given the submarine attractions a 7.65 out of 10. Let me explain why that feels pretty right. At their peak, these attractions represented the cutting edge of what theme parks could do. The 1959 Submarine Voyage was revolutionary, no doubt. The Magic Kingdom's 20,000 Leagues was an immersive experience that nothing else matched. But the closures do matter. The Magic Kingdom version is gone. The Paris version has been diminished. The submarine dream, in its truly purest form, no longer exists. Finding Nemo Submarine Voyage is wonderful, but it's not the same as voyaging with Captain Nemo through the graveyard of lost ships and beneath the polar ice cap. Now that score reflects what was, what is, and what might have been. I'd love to hear your opinion. Now, throughout this episode, I've traced a dream of undersea exploration that Walt Disney pursued from opening day 1955. That dream took many forms. The walkthrough exhibit with movie sets, the submarine fleet that Nixon dedicated, the Nautilus replicas that carried guests through Captain Nemo's world, the Paris walkthrough, the Tokyo simulation, the Finding Nemo revival. Each time the dream seemed to die, when the exhibit closed in 1966, when the Disneyland subs went dormant in 98, when the Magic Kingdom fleet was buried in a landfill, somehow it came back. The dream kept coming back. And now it's time to reveal what I've been saving. Do you remember the 20,000 Leagues exhibit? Captain Nemo's organ in the salon playing Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor. Well, when the exhibit was demolished in 1966, when the sets were carried out and the giant squid lay cracked and shriveled in the sun, this organ was saved. It was refurbished, it was given a new set of pipes, and it was placed in a new room. That room, and that home, of course, sits in the ballroom scene of the Haunted Mansion. Now think about that for a moment. The organ that once gave musical expression to Captain Nemo's tormented soul now accompanies dancing ghosts. The instrument that represents a genius submariner's isolation beneath the waves now plays for phantom waltzes in a haunted ballroom. This organ hasn't played a note since Nemo's fingers last touched it, at least not in its original context. But it endures. It survives. It found a new home and a new attraction, carrying its history with it. That undersea illusion didn't end in 1966 when the exhibit closed. It evolved into the Submarine Voyage. It didn't end in 1998 when the Disneyland subs went silent. It waited, dormant, granted, until Finding Nemo brought it back. And it didn't end in 1994 when the Magic Kingdom subs closed. It lives on in Paris, in Tokyo, in Castaway Cay, in the Nautilus cocktail at Trader Sam's. And it lives in Captain Nemo's organ, still standing in the Haunted Mansion, a connection between the very first year of Disneyland and attractions that operate today. Now, if you listen carefully in the Haunted Mansion ballroom, if you look at that organ and you remember where it came from, you might, just might, hear echoes of what Walt started. Echoes of Jules Verne, echoes of Walt Disney painting a squid at midnight, echoes of mermaids swimming past submarines, of cast members playing pranks, of children pressing their faces to portholes to see what wonders lay beneath the waves. The submarines sail on. Now, our trivia question for this episode tonight was, how many submarines were in Disneyland's Submarine Voyage fleet? Well, like I mentioned, the answer is 8. 8 submarines designed by retired Navy Rear Admiral Joseph Fowler, built by Todd Shipyards, dedicated by Vice President Richard Nixon, the 8th largest submarine fleet in the world, according to Disney's publicity at the time. Now, do you agree with my vote tonight? Please go to the website and cast your own vote, and we'll see what it looks like. Folks, that wraps up episode 29. It's hard to believe we've gone through 29 episodes, and next week is episode 30. It's our 30th episode, which is bizarre to think about, and I'm so grateful for all of you for being here with me through it. Well, I like to have momentous attractions or experiences for these big episodes. And I think it's time to return back, all the way back to the very, very beginning. One of the beginnings of the parks as a whole. One of the genesis of all the attractions we've ever covered to date. We have to go all the way back to the inspiration for the park itself. And we're going to cover the railroads. So next week, we're going to talk about the Disneyland Railroad, the Walt Disney Railroad, and all the fantastic trains and engines and everything you could believe to talk about that inspired Walt to create these wonderful experiences that we know and love. So I look forward to seeing you. Thank you for joining me on this voyage through liquid space. From the movie sets of 1955 to the Finding Nemo submarines of today, from live mermaids to buried Nautilus replicas, this submarine story is one of innovation, tragedy, and persistence. Now remember, the wonderful thing about theme parks is that their stories never truly end. They just wait for someone to tell them again. Now we'll close as we always do from words from Ray Bradbury. Gather round the next great campfire. Let us seek and know and understand a new book, a new instruction book to fly great spaceship Earth through the uncharted seas of the future world. Lock in a dream that is your own. Find what truth is in your blood and beat a path from here to there. Your life is yours to own and be. The world is yours to shape and change. The stars are yours as just reward. Walt Disney locked into his dream of undersea exploration. He found his truth in movie sets and submarine fleets and live mermaids waving to guests through portholes. He beat a path from the 20,000 Leagues exhibit to the Submarine Voyage, of course, and his successors continued that path to Finding Nemo. The world is yours to shape and change. The Imagineers who created these attractions knew that. Joseph Fowler knew that. Tony Baxter knew that. And somewhere in the depth of the Haunted Mansion, Captain Nemo's organ knows it too. Good night, everybody.